Welcome back, everyone, to our second day. This is the Competing on Analytics track, and we're happy to be joining you. And I tell you today, we've got lots and lots of great speakers. It's just going to be a jam-packed day full of great speakers, a lot of information to share, a lot of discussion about the trends and what's happening in analytics, artificial intelligence, data warehouses, data lakes, all that good stuff. So glad to have you aboard with us. And we're going to start this morning. I'm pleased to be joined by Kimberly Reed, Enterprise Architect at Faction Incorporated, based in Colorado. And Kim will be discussing data lakes, a data lake architecture for modern analytics and BI, business intelligence. Kimberly, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kimberly Reed, and I'm here today to present how to solve data lake, data warehouse, and analytics challenges utilizing a multi-cloud architecture. So first, a little bit of background about myself. So I've been about 20 years in the industry at a Fortune 100 and a Fortune 500 company. I've done big data consulting for large and small customers in various industries, including automotive, consumer goods, mass media, technology, aerospace, banking, and others. I've also architected and developed big data solutions, both internally and for other customers. And I led multiple enterprise cloud transformations as well. Currently, I work for Faction Inc. out of Denver, which specializes in multi-cloud solutions. A little bit about Faction itself. So it's founded in 2006. There's currently 9 cloud locations in US and EMEA that we utilize. That number continues to grow. We currently have about 10 multi-cloud related patents. We are a Dell Technologies Platinum partner, and we work with all the public cloud providers. So our agenda today is we're going to have an overview of the data warehouse, data lake, and analytics architecture. We'll talk about challenges the companies face with big data. We'll talk about overcoming those challenges, and then we'll talk about multi-cloud opportunities and Q&A. First, let's take a look at this architecture diagram. So it should look fairly familiar. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on it because I could honestly spend 15 minutes going through this, just this one slide alone. But what I am going to talk about is how, what, and why. So let's first start with the what. All right, we're going to bring in data. You need to bring in data from disparate sources. Those sources can be on-prem, off-prem, cloud, IoT, ERP, sensory, telemetry data, Salesforce, and others. List goes on and on and on. The data can be structured, semi-structured, or even unstructured, depending on what your landing spot is. If it's data lake, yeah, no problem. The Nuvo data warehouses, also no problem. More of the traditional data warehouses, you're pretty much stuck with structured data only, bringing it in. But all of that is great news, right? You want to have data in one place so that's accessible by your enterprise, by all of your business units. And you all want to be speaking the same language, the same truth. You don't want sales operations to have a different view than your marketing team. You don't want finance to come up with different numbers than for instance, your marketing team. So all that's really important when we talk about the truth. Data can be streamed in or near real-time access. It can also be batch. But ultimately, what we want to do with the data, like I said, is that we need to be speaking the truth. We need to have one sense of the truth, but we also need to be asking why. What kinds of information do we need to ascertain from our data lake or data warehouse? We need to be able to ask analytical questions and get analytical answers, as well as predictive analytics as well. For example, if you're sitting in an executive meeting and your CFO or CEO want to discover why the numbers are down for this week, you can dive right into that detail up to the very minute. And show them the response. Maybe you want to look at region 5, why sales are down 5% for this week. Or maybe you want to look at region 3 as your shining example of success, because that same week they're up 25%. So, like I said, analytics, predictive kinds of information, that's the goal that we want to be able to bring to our enterprise. Let's talk about the challenges. So we've got many challenges with big data. This certainly isn't a comprehensive list, but it's certainly ones that I think we can all relate to. So first of all, declining budgets. That happens year over year over year, regardless of whether you're a small company or a large company. And I've seen both. I've had tools that I thought were great in procurement, trying to help out, entered into maybe 3 and 5 year deals to be able to get a cheaper price on that tooling. While that's great, brings down the price, brings down the costs, right? Allocates it over a course of several years. But the other problem with that is that you've got vendor lock-in, if you've got tool lock-in, you no longer necessarily have the best tool after 2 years, after 3 years, because, hey, there's been investment in other tools, in their innovation, and now your shining gem is no longer a shining gem. Also, your resources, right? You had the same resources, maybe less resources than you had a year ago, but yet you have to keep innovating, and you're having more and more data, and there's more and more work, and you have to keep the plane playing. Also, corporate strategies. Sometimes there's unclear, no, or competing data strategies. Also, sometimes there's a lack of corporate sponsorship. And there might be requirements as well to have multi-site availability, meaning that you have to have your mission critical apps in more than one site. And with your declining budget, you probably don't have enough money to be able to stand up another site, let alone figure out the synchronization and replication capabilities. And then there's the overall data, right? Always problems with data. Data accessibility, you need to be able to find the data. You need the data available. You need to understand when the latest data came in. You need the data to be accurate. You have disparate systems, and you have different pipelines that are bringing the data in, and sometimes things break. And we'll talk more about that as we go through this, right? Maybe your governance isn't all it's supposed to be, or maybe you don't even have data governance, and in which case everything's going to fail. And then you also have backups, disaster recovery issues. Again, back to the replication and synchronization issues. Let's talk about the data pipeline, right? Or bringing the data in. Somebody upstream makes a change, a data schema change. What do? Your pipeline just broke, right? So your operation team tries to restart it, but to no avail. So they try it again in another 10 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, but the same result. Problematic, right? Data schema changes upstream, downstream. Then there's competing priorities. You got sales ops wanting one thing. You've got a different stakeholder, maybe supply chain wanting something else, and they both need it all at the same time. And we have other competing priorities as well. What's the problem of the minute, the problem of the day, the problem of the week? Oh, my boss just called, so I have to jump on a call with a customer, or a boss just called and I need to consult with somebody else about some burning issue with marketing, a marketing report. So yes, competing priorities. Then there's overall regulatory compliance and security aspects. Probably one of the biggest areas, biggest problematic areas that there is. You have to have governance. You need to understand all of those regulatory compliance standards, specifications, and you need to secure your data. So now let's talk about overcoming those challenges. On the bottom, we have some of the foundational items. We have the data, we have technology, we have the business requirements and strategy. But now we have to fix and overcome some of those challenges that we talked about before. So the first one is security. Security and access controls. That is paramount, right? So that's why I have that as the first step, right? So whether you're using RBAC, role-based, or ABAC, attribute-based type models, It needs to be there. You don't want to have any one-off solutions, right? You need to secure your data at rest and in motion. And you need to, of course, also abide by the regulatory compliance aspects as well. Then there's scalability, performance, and processing. So one of the casualties of your budget might be, hey, you can't get additional hardware, or if you can, maybe not so much hardware, but your data continues to grow. So you need to be able to scale. You need to add additional storage. Well, if you're already on cloud, it's easy enough to get additional storage, right? So storage on demand, also compute on demand, having elastic compute. Today's hardware, you can scale up, that is vertically, and you can scale horizontally. In addition, most applications now, most solutions also separate storage from compute, so you no longer have to overbuild one to compensate for the other. Then the next two items I'm going to take in tandem: build in resiliency and insulate your application. So remember, we talked about the pipeline breaking from an upstream application, maybe your ERP system that changed a data schema. Maybe a data field is no longer an integer, it's a character, or the field length changed or something, right? You have to insulate your application. You have to insulate your lake and your data warehouse so that it doesn't break. You can't break your pipelines. You need to build in resiliency, you need to build in fault tolerance, and you need to do this through automation as well. And in conjunction, have processes and procedures lined up in the case, and it will happen, that something happens upstream or even downstream to break your overall pipeline. Then you have to monitor. You have to monitor your monitoring. You need to know when your data is supposed to arrive. And if it doesn't arrive, you need to have notifications sent out to your users, notification system that says, hey, the last update was 1 hour ago. The data is late. It's going to be, the next run is expected, 2 hours from now. Not ideal, really, when you have late data, but it's better than your users discovering it on their own when they're running a report and they're doing comparisons between your ERP system and your system, or Salesforce and your system, and you're out of whack. And then people lose confidence in what it is that you have as that single source of the truth. We've talked about automation, build it in from the start. Then there's overall governance, right? You have to have governance. It's not a sexy item at all. It's hard work. It needs to be done. There has to be processes and procedures defined. You have to have data stewards that do the care and the feeding of that data. You need to be able to find the data, access the data, tag the data accordingly. So maybe PII data, for example, you need to have it, not only find it and tag it, but then maybe you have to mask it for certain types of reports, et cetera. All that comes under the governance and data stewards. Today, there's data catalogs that go out and search your data lakes, data warehouses. They can also incorporate machine learning. So they can learn from previous tags, previous procedures that have been done, so that your data catalog itself can do that for you, with, again, the data stewards, of course, being the final approver of that. And then there's overall metadata management as well. And then certification. Again, it all goes back to your single source of truth. You need to make sure that it is the single source of truth. And one way to show that it's the single source of truth is you have certified reports, you have certified data, either with notations from a watermark or the data itself that your data stewards bless and know that it's certified. So it's data that can be trusted with time dimensions. Let's talk about multi-cloud opportunities. So first of all, what is multi-cloud? Is multi-cloud mean that, oh, I have a presence in Office 365 and and I have my on-premise data? No, not exactly. So multi-cloud is the use of multi-cloud computing and storage and services in a single network architecture. So It has a single IP, a single VLAN, and a namespace across public clouds. So in other words, you can have data sitting out there, accessible from multi-clouds. You don't want to have to move data. Moving data is expensive, not only for you financially and having precarious types of unpredictable egress fees, but it's also expensive in terms of resources and time trying to move data. For us, Infaction and other multi-cloud solutionists, move is a 4-letter word, and we avoid it at all costs. So we make data available from all the clouds. You can access it, read, write, access, and be able to utilize it. And when you utilize it, you can be in any cloud you want. Therefore, you can utilize the best in breed tool sets, right? So if I want to use the cognitive capabilities on Azure or SageMaker or whatever it is, right? You can do that. And you don't have to move your data. Resources are freed up. You've got on-demand capacity and infrastructure. You automatically can get multi-sites and replication capabilities, HRDAS and DRAS for hybrid disaster recovery services and disaster recovery services. There are managed solutions that are out there. And as I said, data can be accessed from all clouds on-premise with read-write access from all. And competing priorities. Now that you're freed up from all of these other emergencies, you can focus on your key business priorities. Now, let's talk about regulatory compliance. So I don't know about you, but I probably can't cite all of the specifications in the ISO 9001 or the ISO 27001 or the ISO 20018, or even all the specifications in SOC 2. But hey, these cloud service providers have it all documented, and we can certainly deal with that. They're experts at these areas and can certainly help. I know what you're going to say, right? Multi-cloud in and of itself has challenges such as data silos. We already talked about that though, right? We wouldn't have a data silo because we do have a single view of that data that can be accessed across all those multiple clouds. Then there's the financial unpredictability with egress fees. That's another thing that we can help out with, right? In some cases, there are 0 egress fees, and in some cases, we feel that those egress fees can be substantially reduced because, again, you're not copying data here, there, and everywhere. So with that, if you're interested in learning more, we have a white paper and cheat sheet that we will make available. So thank you for your time. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Kimberly. That was great. Very informative. We welcome comments, questions from our audience. We have a Q&A tab over on the right-hand side. Feel free to have your questions, add your questions. Kim is standing by to provide further information on what she's been discussing.
It looks like there was a little glitch during that, so you might have some questions in terms of the overall playback and potentially multi-cloud related questions.
It did skip to the end there, or back to the beginning at one point. I tried to get it back to where it was, but I didn't really have the timing right, I think. So sorry about that.
Everything you wanted to present was came across, right, Kim? I mean, are there any details you would like to elaborate more on?
So let's talk about, maybe if you could go back to the slide with the multi-cloud aspects. What we wanted to talk about there is, multi-cloud isn't necessarily a panacea, right? But there are certainly advantages to utilizing multi-cloud. For example, when you're talking about data science, when you're talking about, having a large amount of data, right? And let's say you have a presence in multiple clouds, right? So maybe you have presence in Azure, or maybe you have something else in Google or Oracle and all these different clouds, right? Because, hey, maybe you have a need for a best tool in one of those other cloud providers. But what do you do about the data, right? You don't want to have to move data. One of my colleagues actually gave a presentation last week, and I loved what he said. To my company, Faction, move is a 4-letter word, right? We don't want to have to move data. You want to be able to access data in one spot, right? That is where we can come in and help out that situation, right? Because once you have to move data, then when you're talking about big data, it makes it a very difficult and tenuous task, right? It takes up so much time, if you can even move it or replicate it or sync it, right? So you don't want to actually have to do that. And there are ways that we can circumvent that aspect in many cases, right? So if you're thinking about, maybe you're involved in genomics or, certain like digital photography, for example. Again, you've got so much data, you don't want to have to be moving it. And whether that's on-prem or not, again, the key is you don't want to have to move data. Moving data is very expensive. And then again, we get back to the overall issue of what is the sense of, or what is the source of truth if you're copying data here, there, everywhere. Okay, so I did want to kind of highlight that because during the glitch of the presentation that was played back, I don't think that came out clear. And in many cases, again, you go to different cloud service providers. Unfortunately, they charge you to utilize your own data, right? If you're moving that data out and around, you get charged for it. So if that is something that you've had to deal with, those kinds of complexities, those are things that the Faction and I can help you with. So, I invite, you all to reach out to us, and we can talk more about that aspect. But ultimately, I'm here to answer your questions on data lakes, data warehouses, architecture of such. Again, as I said in the beginning of the video, I've had at least 15 years experience in big data. So I've lived it, I've architected it, I've also worked with many customers in various industries that have had all kinds of big data challenges. So willing and ready to take any questions you might have.
I'm going to jump in here for just a second, Kim, and remind folks that your slides are available for download in the Faction booth in the exhibit hall. So sometime after the session is over, sometime before the end of the day, we invite people to go there and grab those and interact with your colleagues and you if you're actually going to be there.
And Kim, one thing that comes to mind when we talk about multi-cloud and I guess essentially managing data lakes, data warehouse environments within a multi-cloud type of environment, is there a risk of enterprises kind of turning over security and governance, or assuming that the cloud providers are overseeing some of that security and governance? Shouldn't that always be the responsibility of the enterprise that owns the data?
Well, absolutely. I mean, every company is kind of their own captain, right? You need to only your company, only your data stewards, only your company understands what your security needs are, right? It's just like, hey, if I were going to, even in my own company, let's say, if I wanted access to accounts receivable information, it is doubtful that I would be able to get access to that. Why? Because my particular role, that as of an enterprise architect, I have absolutely no need to see accounts receivable kind of information. So that's why I say the overall governance and the overall security is probably one of the the two of the most foundational items that you need to be concerned with and get that correct. And yes, it's not going to be the cloud provider that knows about your data, right? And it's not going to be your IT department that knows about your data. It's actually the business that owns that particular data. I will say, though, that cloud providers, know all about certain specifications. Like we talked about, unfortunately, in the video, during that glitch, but you'll see it if you replay it on your own. They know all about the different specifications, the ISO 9001, the ISO 27001, SOC 2 compliance, PCI compliance, all of those things, right? So each one of those cloud providers is quite aware of that. Each cloud provider also has information readily available on specifications for those. But yes, ultimately, that responsibility goes back to you, to your company, and your overall governance and your overall security model that you have available.
Okay, yeah, it's cloud providers. It's their business, right? To look after security and stay updated on security protocols and standards, which can be somewhat difficult for data center staff, resident data center staff.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And in terms of data lakes, one thing I find interesting about data lakes is they're kind of forward looking, they're kind of future looking, right? You can be putting a lot of data into a data lake that the business doesn't necessarily have a direct use for, but maybe a year or two down the road, something's going to come up. They'll develop some kind of analytical tool that will really start to add some value to that data. Is this I guess the question becomes, does a data lake need to capture everything? And if so, doesn't that create some massive storage issues?
Well, let's talk about that. So I want to dissect your question a little bit. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is, right, the whole idea of a data lake is so that you have a single source of the truth. And yes, you do want to bring in all kinds of data. Now, it doesn't mean, hey, you bring everything in from the internet if you have no use for it, right? But certainly if you're looking at, like your Salesforce data, your ERP data, maybe, other kinds of information from other sources, right? You can combine those to look at those. Now, a data lake has some special characteristics. So specifically, when we bring in data into a data lake, you immediately want to be able to preserve that data as it was from the source. We call that raw data, right? It comes in exactly from the source. You preserve it, it's available, you have a time dimension, date dimension on it so that it can be replayed. So your pipeline, for example, that pipeline can play immediately. We talked about streaming at the early onset. You can stream the data anytime through your pipeline and play it and have it then available for consumption. Now, a data lake is also a great place for your data scientist persona, or even your business analysts as well, right? But especially those data scientists who are looking for what could happen. What can we do if we want to increase revenue by 3%, right? Those are the kinds of things, not only analytical, but prescriptive and predictive kinds of things that data scientists will look at. So they'll look at the raw data. They'll look at, ways to answer questions or even come up with new questions. That's the whole idea. I also want to illustrate a story that I encountered with actually a rather large company. As I stated, we had brought in ERP data into our data lake. The ERP system, one of the operators actually deleted all of their ERP data for a course of, I think it was about a month's worth of data. The backups that they had were not good, right? So they weren't able
Wow.
to restore it. We actually had all that data on the data lake because, again, we brought in the data from the ERP system, happens on a daily schedule, actually even more than that. Oftentimes with your ERP systems, you're going to want to bring in certain facets more often than even daily, several times a day. But having that data preserved, we had it available, could take it back, give it back to the ERP system to have that. And at any time in the future, right, you want to replay the data, you certainly can.
What a fantastic use case. Backup recovery, business continuity plays into that as well.
Yeah, it wasn't one of those that we had in mind, but it certainly
Yeah.
worked out well for the time. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Kim, this has been fantastic. We appreciate you being able to present. Again, we added a link to Kimberly's video for those who want to run through it again. It's also available at the site for your viewing, so we can capture all that information. And thank you again, Kimberly. Great presentation, very informative, and we appreciate having you with us today.
Thank you.